huge amount of other clinical groups who are using orthotics as well. And then orthotics are a multi-million-dollar business just on the Amazon sales and online sales and the kennel shop sales of stuff alone, from simple insoles right up to all singing, all dancing. So there's a huge variation in the products.
Absolutely, and I think the key thing is that it maybe comes back down to the significance of the pathology. Because even here I am at 31 years qualified, and there are times that I'm thinking, well, I can probably get away with just using a very simple over-the-counter product here. And, when do we make the clinical decision to, either not use any product at all and simply use strength and conditioning and footwear advice? And there are cases for that, absolutely. And I notice on the likes of Instagram and other social platforms, these fantastic groups developing where they're teaching people how to develop strength, develop flexibility.
This is the Justin Blake podcast experience for health professionals that mean business. So wherever you are in the world, listen as we discuss everything you need for you and your health business to survive and thrive. Thanks for listening.
Good afternoon, everybody, and here we are with my good friend and colleague Martin McGeough from Sligo in the west of Ireland. Afternoon, Martin, how are you?
I'm very good, Justin. Thank you, and hi to everybody.
Yeah, so we were just talking before we came on. Yeah, quite strange times. I think the last time I sort of spoke to you on the before lockdown last year, about this end of January, February, I think you were just coming back from Pakistan, or you were just there. So you usually do quite a lot of travel, which has been curtailed.
Absolutely, yeah. And yes. Some people thought that I would be really upset about that, that how was I going to cope without this travel? But to be honest, it's actually been fine. I actually really enjoyed not traveling. So, yeah, that's right. We were just coming back. We actually cut our trip to Pakistan short just by a few days because that's when really the pandemic was announced and lots of airlines were starting to ban flights from certain countries. And we had kind of already got to the point.
We still fly into Ireland from anywhere in the world. That's a year later. So, I mean,
yes,
let's not start going down that line. I mean, Ireland and the UK still haven't locked down, like New Zealand or somewhere else did about 10 months ago. Wonder why that's why we're not having any.
Well, that could take us to a whole discussion around feminine leadership. And, when you look at New Zealand, where the Prime Minister there did lock down the country, and, maybe there's some.
This is a bit choppy. You see it's sort of dropping out a little bit. You still there, Martin? I'm sure we'll come back to this now in a second. I'll just do a little bit of filling because he seems to have frozen. Maybe it's me. I don't know. And he's not still there. Okay. Hello. Let me see whether we can get him back. Okay. He seems to have dropped off, but we'll keep going. I'm sure I'm sure the technology in Sligo will kick in a second. That's the west of Ireland, slightly more rural than where I am. He's still not back again. Let me see. And hopefully he'll be back again in a second. So what we were talking about was that Martin was working out, we're helping to set up one of the courses in the universities out there in Pakistan. So, and I'm not too sure. I think he'd been out there a couple of times. So we shall see. I'll stay keep filling. I can see he's trying to open the email again. So whether that's not happening. So if anybody's got any questions for myself or for Martin, talk a little bit about biomechanics this afternoon, orthotics, new advances in orthotics, 3D scanning and printing, podiatry as a whole. And hopefully he'll be signing back in now in a second. I'll just keep filling. So here he comes back now.
Okay, guys have switched technology from an iPad to an iPhone. Something to do with Wi-Fi there, I think.
You'll have laptops and stuff. No? Okay, we were just saying. So
can you hear me?
Yeah, Andy, you're back on again. Oh, good. So when I'd spoken to you when you were out in Pakistan,
sorry about that.
That's okay. When you've been out in Pakistan, that hadn't been the first time that you've been out there, had it?
No, the trip to Pakistan, that was probably my third time to Pakistan, and the initial concept was to look at simply setting up a podiatric clinic in Pakistan to provide MSK services to the local population in Islamabad. Okay. And I was introduced to Pakistan by a girl called Aisha Wajahat. And when I was there, it became very clear that setting up one clinic was a simple solution to providing care to, well, really the elites. And what really Pakistan needed, and other countries in that area, was podiatric education. So how do you train the trainer? And that sort of became a concept. When I came back, I kind of thought, well, okay, go and set up a clinic. Yes, you could have a successful clinic, but really, how does that benefit the nation? And then we started looking at the demographics and looking at what's happening in terms of foot health in Pakistan. And we suddenly found out that Pakistan has one of the highest rates of amputation of the foot and ankle.
Indian subcontinent, Pakistan and India, it's huge. I've looked at the figures before. It's like, 20 times as much here as here in the West.
It was colossal, and the effect on families and people's livelihoods and so on was just colossal. So that made us really start thinking, right, well, okay, think of how we were educated. What did that look like? Could we take that model and bring it to somewhere like Pakistan? And that's been what we've been pursuing, and trying to look at how we would link to a university in Islamabad. How we link to a teaching hospital, and then how would we actually facilitate that? Of course, now with COVID and this pandemic, it's kind of pushed everything back. Yes. But we're still pursuing that. And what I've attempted to do is to create a team of people around me who have better skills than I have within the field of education. So, Prof. Ashford, who was the dean of the college and the Royal College of in Scotland, he's come along and helped, and there's other people involved, and we're just trying to think, right, how do we get this off the ground? How do we bring podiatric medicine to Pakistan? And part of that journey, Justin, has been interesting in that we've also met World Health Organization officials from other countries in the region. So exactly as you said, the entire area does not have podiatric medicine, and it has a diabetic major problem. Yeah. So we're exploring that.
Statistics are frightening, but of course, this isn't the first time that you've been involved in education at different levels. Obviously, with your different roles over the years, and with education then through sort of with Firefly and the Orthotics lab. So you've been sort of pushing that quite a lot.
Yeah, I think that I was very fortunate as a student and, early in my sort of postgraduate career to have been, influenced by some great podiatrists, and that sharing of ideas, concepts, maybe not all, but you learn from all these scenarios. So it's always been a part of, I suppose, my remit in work is to share what I have with others and to learn from every podiatrist. And that's led on to, in terms of Firefly, a big part of what we do is MSK education. And we work with podiatrists to help them translate what it is they want to do with orthotic therapy or exercise prescription or whatever it is, footwear advice. How does that all come together to create some sort of offloading regime,
Yeah. Because orthotic is, at the moment, did you say it's a load modifier now? Is that what it does?
Yeah, well, that's essentially what I think it really does. It modifies load, yeah.
So how does it modify load then?
Well, I suppose what you're looking at is all of the evidence that people are looking at in terms of the scientific community originally would have started in, well, how are we altering the kinematics?
Yeah.
And of course, they couldn't really find that much change in the angle of the calcaneum or whatever, or what's happening to the tibia position in gait, or, you know. So what they started to look at was, well, what's happening to load? And they knew in the early days of, you know, rootweed in Iran and so on, that they were putting these things into people's shoes and people were getting better, but they just couldn't work out why. And really, that's been the history of orthotic therapy. And we don't really know what.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
They're going to come back in for the review and everything's going to be good.
Is there something happening at a proprioceptive level? Is there something happening? You know, there's all sorts of things going on that we still don't know, you know. And then the evidence moved to the study of kinetics and the loading. And you know, how do you measure the change of a load inside the foot? Well, you can't really do that even yet. So we're still crossing our fingers, Justin.
Yeah. I mean, that was the interesting thing about the talk with Doug Ritchie a week or 10 days ago, and his excellent new book that in terms of pathomechanics or how things happen rather than the treatment. And again, I mean, it covers a lot in the books. It definitely I think it will push biomechanic pathology understanding on. I mean, just even the sort of certain things that we're told to sort of measure and modify, you know, completely sort of debunked in a lot of things. Like there's more foot dorsiflexion in the midfoot than there is in the ankle. Yet we continue to measure ankle dorsiflexion and equinus and things, and you know, so it's. And I mean, of course, you see. I'm sure people who are working in a quite a sort of advanced way through musculoskeletal work, and people who are sort of quite there's quite a range, isn't there?
Yeah, and I suppose the range varies from, you know, country to country, and even from, you know, one school to another. I think the sort of the frame of reference and the educational models that each of us kind of adopt, you know, it really depends on what was the leadership of the School of Podiatric Medicine you went to. You know, were they in favour of orthotic therapy and biomechanics and, you know, MSK assessments? Were they more into diabetes? And I think that's been the history certainly in the UK. And I imagine it's pretty similar elsewhere in the kind of Commonwealth type countries. So if you look at South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, you know, United States, those models are all pretty similar. We speak a similar language, and yet we're all coming to that foot and ankle and lower limb maybe from a slightly different perspective, and all trying to arrive at the same output. But it varies enormously, of course.
And then obviously the technology then continues to change. I mean, I did a LinkedIn poll a couple of weeks ago, and also in Facebook groups as well. It was interesting to see that nearly 40% of colleagues now are taking or making impressions or taking an impression of the foot with a 3D scanner now. So they're getting away from plaster casts.
That's an interesting stat that you've just quoted, because that would correlate with what we've seen. You know, our orders coming into the lab, you know, traditionally would have been plaster Paris or foam impressions.
Yes.
Sometimes the, you know, little STS socks as well. But now we're up at about 40% digital.
Okay.
And the big breakthrough probably has been the cost of scanners. You know, the advent of the structure sensor scanner, its ability to be connected to an iPad. And now, well, within our company, we've designed our own software that allows the digital end-to-end solution and link that then to 3D printing. So that's quite exciting. And in terms of the 3D printing, it's a sustainable plant-based material. So I'm kind of looking at, over the last, say, 5 years, going to all the orthotic fairs, the prosthetic fairs all over Europe, and shocked by how so much of it is based on the petroleum industry. You know, It's plastics, carbon fibers. And, you know, I'm involved in some other groups that are looking at, well, you know, climate crisis. How do we change our behaviors? And I know orthotic therapy isn't, when we produce an orthotic, it's not a single-use product, but at the same time, if we can, as professional people, change how we practice and what we do, it can only be beneficial. So, we've looked at all our packaging to become more biodegradable. We've looked at our products to become sustainable. And part of that, I think, is, and there's a slow uptake on it. So that surprises me, and yet it doesn't surprise me. How do we get people to recognize the benefits in terms of being sustainable,
And do you just think that then is in terms of people are just used to using sort of traditional materials and they've always sort of done that? I mean, are they worried? So what are the newer 3D printed that you're using? It says plant-based, is it?
Yes, it's a plant-based material, and it's sustainably grown palm oil.
Yeah.
So that's what we're currently using, and we've worked with the material technology companies and engineers to really get it to the point that it replicates quite close to polypropylene. So
was this the work you would have done with the European group and IFAB over the years? Is that way that direction?
Well, that would have been, that's probably 10 years ago, and that would have been, rapid prototyping. And at that point, they were making pretty brittle products and pretty rigid, which would fracture. And it's only really in the last probably 18 months, maybe 2 years, that HP designed a machine that could use these different materials. And that revolutionized 3D printing, particularly for small parts, and in our case, for orthoses,
Yeah.
But it's a thing that's rapidly changing, and to me, really the important thing is, how do you design software to make innovative products? And we haven't got there yet.
Let's just stop on that, because how do you make software that, especially with the with companies that are still scanning from foot pressures? How do you make a 3D orthotic from a 2D foot scan?
Well, you extrapolate the data, you make it up, and what you do then is you use your 2D pressure plate scan to create a predictive model that's based on the shoe size and a simple kind of, I suppose, arch support. And that is very, very different than what we as the podiatric profession would classify as a custom-made podiatric medical device. Challenge.
Because I remember talking to you a few years ago, and of course the way things, and that was probably 8-10 years ago, the way things were going were the labs were all shifting to more towards a library type of system. And for anybody who doesn't know what that is, I mean, they have 90 say different variations of an orthotic type, and they'll match it to the shape and the size and whatever is requested. But it's already pre-made. It's not custom made. And so most of the labs getting away from that now and transferring to the 3D because it's easier rather than having to hold a huge amount of stock and stuff.
No, I think those systems still exist, and predominantly I see that in the United States, but they offer their customer base, the option. I can give you a product made from our top 100, say, positive models, or I can go full custom, and they declare it, and there's a difference in the price. So I have no problem with that if they're upfront with it and they say, look, here we have the top 100 shapes, and our software algorithm can scan your cast or your image and can say, here's the positive model that we think best suits the foot you've sent in, and that's going to cost you X. Or we can go full custom, which means we're doing all the cast corrections and so on, which obviously costs a bit more, So some are still doing that. I suppose what's happening with the concept of the 3D printed product is that the design file is slightly different than something going to a mill. So if you're sending a G code to a mill, to mill EVA or mill polypropylene, or to mill an MDF solid, positive model, that's different than a design file going into a 3D printer. So that just requires software. And from our perspective, it was like, can we design a 3D printed, sustainable plant-based product that is very similar to polypropylene? Polypropylene has been probably the go-to product material for the last 30 years, maybe even 40 years. And now the interesting thing is, well, how do we now design products that maybe have a built-in offloader, shall we say, for the second met head? How do we now look at pathology precise designs? So we say, okay, you tell us what the pathology is through your physical examination, your in-depth history taking, your assessment of the foot. Like when you say, okay, well, this person's got a, second met head, synovitis. Okay, well, based on that, we're now going to design a product that can offer that second met head, rather than thinking, should the rear foot be at 2 degrees varus and the forefoot be at 4 degrees? It's moving to a slightly different way of prescribing. Yet we haven't fully finished that iterative process, but I think that's what's exciting about it. When I talk to podiatrists on the phone or on whatever platform, they're usually saying to me, I've got this patient, here's my assessment, this is what I've got, this is the footwear they wear, this is their sporting activities, this is their general health, this is their medical condition, I think this is the diagnosis. And then we go through a process of like differential diagnosis. What do you think it is? Okay, it sounds like that. And I'm saying, okay, what's the shoe? What's the footwear? Right, okay, we're going to design a product that fits the foot but also fits the shoe. And we've got to offload, well, in this case, the second met head. But that could be, it needs to offload the plantar aspect of the calcaneum, to offload the perineal tendons, whatever. That's exciting.
Of course, but as you sort of said there, I mean, I suppose that's one of the benefits that can, with the sustainability that the clinics will be able to use for their orthotics, because I think we all get caught up with it, podiatrists especially, and as you know, in Ireland and across a lot of different sectors, there's a huge amount of other clinical groups who are using orthotics as well. And then orthotics are a multi-million-dollar business just on the Amazon sales and online sales and the kennel shop sales of stuff alone, from simple insoles right up to all singing, all dancing. So there's a huge variation in the products.
Absolutely, and I think the key thing is that it maybe comes back down to the significance of the pathology, because even here I am at 31 years qualified, and there are times that I'm thinking, well, I can probably get away with just using a very simple over-the-counter product here. And, when do we make the clinical decision to, well, either not use any product at all and simply use strength and conditioning and footwear advice? And there are cases for that, absolutely. And I notice on the likes of Instagram and other social platforms, these fantastic groups developing where they're teaching people how to develop strength, develop flexibility. There's one called Wealth, WHEALTH, really interesting concept where they're looking at, okay, it's not just about developing strength and conditioning. How do you look at practices such as mindfulness? How do you look at things like gratitude practices? Now you're getting into this sort of whole holistic approach to life, But
holistic. I mean, because again, I work with chiropractors over years, and I didn't realize. I mean, the chiropractic people who would look at that type of thing would look at more a vitalistic type of take. That's it. It's rather than sort of the sort of the mechanists at the other end of it who aren't interested in whether you're getting sleep or whether you're stressed or whether you're eating right, and chakras are in order.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So, where do you go with all that, Justin?
But it is the whole psychosocial model of the sort of. I mean, and I think that's more sort of involved now, and I think people are looking for more than because there isn't there the sort of the there is no other thing, with the health service or the health systems that are there isn't that sort of all-encompassing psychosocial model isn't always able to sort of be plugged in, and so it tends to be sometimes very sort of symptom sort of driven rather than holistic, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I have a great colleague here in Sligo who's a physiotherapist. I'll give him a shout out, Derek Parle, and he's very much into the psychosocial model and how we communicate to patients, and the notion that we need to listen more and to just say, well, how are things going for you right now, rather than jumping into, here's your imbalance and here's your deformity, and all that type of thing. So it's and physiotherapists in general are, I think, maybe a little bit ahead of us in terms of that psychosocial model. I know people like Ian Griffiths and so on have talked a lot about it, and it's important. You know?
Even just the simplest of thing of somebody coming in and being sort of like, quite hyped up and quite concerned about a problem, and when you can allay their fears, you can automatically see the sort of relief on their sort of face. And
I had a really interesting experience there, probably prior to the pandemic, where I started to, look at the patient profile and then even say things like, well, now, okay, who's looking after you? Who's caring for your precious self among your busy life? It was amazing to see people's response to that statement, to take the time and just say, who is caring for you? Who's caring for your precious self among everything that you do for your family, your work, your this, your that? And some people hadn't even thought about it. And it was quite a moment to see people emotionally nearly break down when you actually took the time to say, can you take a pause and look after your precious self? And it was like, whoa. And say, right, okay, you know what we're going to do? We're going to begin with 5-minute walks daily. And these were people that had, maybe plantar heel pain, but they just couldn't walk. And I said, okay, let's just start with 5 minutes a day. And then we're going to build that up, and we're going to add a little tiny bit of stretching in, and then we're going to, and it's so the psychosocial model it's really significant, and I think our knowledge on it's going to increase and increase as
we've talked with that before. I would say some of the practitioners that I work with, and if you listen back to the talk with Ronnie Ward, and again, it's all about the words we use and the especially sort of at a neural level or neuromuscular level. And like other clinicians that I've seen, like David McGeough and Anthony Claffey and things, these guys are all sort of streets ahead. We were never really, that wasn't part of the really training. We were just fixing the symptom treatment. Quite interesting. And of course, as you said just before when we were talking, a lot of clinics that we know have never been busier coming out of the sort of first round of the lockdown there at the towards the end of the summer.
Yeah, I think that's been an interesting thing for us in that we closed really for 3 months. And then when we opened at the end of June, really, and I know some of my colleagues in the UK and Ireland have had the same experience, that the clinics were incredibly busy. And I tried to think back and think, well, okay, people have been more active. They've been out walking, hiking, jogging, running, all the different sports. And they also wanted to come out and engage. There was a social interaction there. And they also had more money because they hadn't spent any money in the lockdown. And the governments of both countries had been subsidizing them, So I was surprised to look at the revenues at the end of July and end of August and was like, whoa, we're really, really busy here. So we've been very fortunate as essential health workers, even now in the lockdown we're currently in, to continue working. And we have to show gratitude for that. We're very fortunate. So
yeah. And of course, colleagues within the health service and HSE, they haven't had any downtime at all. They've been busier than ever.
That's right. Yeah.
But again, it's been good opportunities for colleagues who work privately. I know a couple of the clinics that I work with in the UK and a couple in the States, because there has been a more of a slowdown in the appointments coming through the health system. The private practices have benefited sort of quite a bit because they're quite sort of flexible on how they can sort of adapt to what the patient needs. Where the health service seems to be quite slow.
Yeah, well, I think for a lot of the health service, and what I'm seeing also now is even, we would have military contracts within the UK. So a lot of the podiatrists are being seconded out of seeing, say, MSK consultations and actually now giving vaccinations.
Yeah.
So that's been a big thing within the military anyway. So they're now, again, because we're trained in local anaesthesia, we can give injections. It makes sense that the government would suggest a redeployment into that role. Yeah. So, yeah, that's happening right across the board.
And And do you see that, just touching on back to what you sort of said before, and that's where it sort of dropped out, when we talked about sort of the, you sort of wanted the sort of female sort of perspective on the lockdown. And obviously we're in quite a sort of female friendly profession. I mean, I know when my class that I qualified, there were 17 of us. I think there was 3 fellas and 14 girls. That's quite the split. So do you think that has sort of changed the way the profession has developed a bit?
Has it changed the way the profession has developed? Well, I mean, I think feminine leadership is going to be different than male leadership. And, I mentioned that just in the concept of New Zealand. And, New Zealand's an island, so is the UK, so is Ireland. And yet they very effectively locked down, and I sometimes wonder, is there not wanting to completely slam the masculinity, but is there sometimes a toxicity with it and ego-driven? And the masculinity needs to find its femininity, if that makes sense, the yin and yang. And it's not even yin and yang, it's yin yang, it's the two things together, and I think sometimes that we need to, and maybe there's a whole discussion around the decisions men make, the decisions women make, and it's interesting that men tend to make decisions that you and me are sitting here being interviewed, and we rise up in these organizations and we need to take on board our feminine side and maybe look at things differently. Now I'm going off on a complete different tangent. This should be another podcast somewhere,
Yeah, well, yeah, it's quite female sort of driven.
Yeah, I mean, just because probably the numbers, but yet if you go to the leadership in something like the different organizations, they are predominantly still men. So that lends itself, well, why does that happen? And, it opens up a whole discussion around, the science of it and the decisions.
Well, there is. That's sort of quite, that happens through quite a lot of careers. And of course, it's got to do with sort of women taking time off career to raise sort of families as well, and whether they don't sort of rise up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in it. If you look at, say, some of the countries in the Scandinavian countries that, are a little bit more advanced in these concepts, and they allow, okay, men and women make whatever decisions you want, and you still tend to get more men in engineering type careers, and you get more women in caring careers such as podiatry, medicine, nursing. So women tend to care about people, and men are thinking more about things.
Do you think then that's why podiatry then isn't quite as business sort of driven in terms of sort of private work, or outside I
think that might be more to do with the educational system. That let's take Ireland as an example. If you're trained in Northern Ireland, you were trained to enter the NHS. Over in Galway now, you're trained to enter the HSE. You weren't really trained to be in business. So it's more of a sort of, business training concept. I don't really know whether it's to do with the gender in terms of more male, more female. I think that there's, lots of very successful female business people. I just think that's the structure of the educational system and then the healthcare systems that people tend to be employed in.
Yeah. And then in courses that say who were going to develop in Asia, would that feed into with the health system that's already there?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because we're at a really crucial point at the moment, because initially we looked at it and said, well, why don't we replicate the type of educational system that we had, which was kind of, allied health model, 3 or 4 year degree course, and, a training clinic built into the university structure, free care for the patients coming in. And we ended up meeting representatives from the Pakistan Medical Council, and they really threw a curveball at us. And they presented a slightly different model. And they said, what we would like you to consider is, rather than, well, let me just back up one step. We were trying to position podiatric medicine alongside dentistry and medicine, rather than as an adult health profession, because what happened in Pakistan with physiotherapy is pretty sad and sorrowful. They didn't get the profession regulated. They opened a school. Lots of private universities saw it as an opportunity now to make money. So let's get X amount of students enrolled for physiotherapy, run a 3 or 4 or even 5-year degree course. We don't care what happens to them after that. We don't care if there's a structure in place that they can get a job or not. We just want the revenue per year for each student. Yeah. And what happened then was no regulation, poor quality. Everybody within medicine then goes, those physiotherapists don't know anything. They're dreadful. So what we looked at was, right, what's really important here is regulation. And then because of podiatric medicine being part of the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons in Glasgow, alongside dentistry, alongside medicine, we said, okay, this is our way of presenting podiatric medicine. So let's position it that we want to be regulated by the PMC, the Pakistan Medical Council. They then said, what we want you to do is consider not creating a 4-year allied type of health program. Give us a 2-year fellowship program that we can train medics to be podiatrists. Okay, so this was really interesting. So could you then replicate a 2 years master's degree type program that's in existence in the UK? Could that be created into some type of fellowship program so that a medic who's just qualified, rather than specializing in rheumatology or in orthopedics, they can actually specialize in podiatric medicine? Now, that model would be transferable all over the world because all the other countries recognize medicine and the training program is the same in each country. So that got me really quite excited that you could create a 2-year master's degree program that really would become a fellowship program. And that's where we're at now. And we're not sure whether we can actually make that happen or whether we're going to have to go down the route of a 3 or 4 year, allied health type program.
Well, that's quite interesting because, of course, that would expedite. And I mean, you're aware of what the idea of the type the course it's a Plymouth University is running in terms of like an apprenticeship type of qualification through with a mentor in a podiatry clinic and the training done through there?
Yes, and interestingly, Plymouth University and ourselves do some work together where we invite their students on scholarship type programs to come and spend time in the lab and spend time in our clinics.
Yeah.
And, so I'm watching what they're doing closely, and I think it's all evolving. And we were also at one point talking to Buckingham University, who were interested in doing a 2-year degree, undergrad degree, but that was going to be no summer holidays, no longer holidays, condense it into 2 years. And it was really aimed at the Asian market.
4 years.
They would basically fly in from Asia, spend 2 years in the UK, get a degree, and go back to Asia.
Yeah, well, you've lectured in, and my cousin works in the Royal College of Surgeons in Dublin, and I mean they just wrote a check at the start of the start of last semester for £1 million to rent out Croke Park to put all their foreign students in, and they were really worried that they weren't going to get all the foreign students coming to Dublin, which they did. But the initial training is done in Dublin, and then they go back to in the Middle East, in Malaysia, where they have their training school, and all the clinical work is done there. So I mean, it's those sort of things, and I mean they train students from all around the world. So online is the way it's going to sort of move. I don't think there's going to be, but you will need the clinical aspect of the training. So whether that could be done,
they'll end up what they call blended learning, and the blended learning will be some sort of workshops, practical sessions, but the other part of it will be all online.
Yeah. it'll be it'll be interesting to see how that will progress. But yeah, definitely condense it down into I was one of the girls in my year, as well as doing her podiatry degree. I mean, she was doing an open university degree at the same time. I mean, she was multitasking. We were far too busy enjoying ourselves in London and all sorts of things. But it's the courses are sort of quite stretched out quite a bit.
Yeah, and I think you'll see that changing. I mean, there's certain within, say, Pakistan, to have a degree course at the allied health level, it actually has to be 4 years. So some countries may have stipulations with regard to undergraduate degrees. And
just move your microphone slightly.
So, and then you have to
just move your phone slightly, Martin, because it's quite. Sorry.
Council. So there's all sorts of hurdles along the way.
Hello.
At this moment in time.
Sorry, I think you had your hand.
Oh, sorry. How's that?
Yeah, that's better. You had your hand.
Can you hear me now? Is that better?
That's better. That's great.
How's that, Justin?
So back to sort of
You're
training. We've got a question from Sean Savage. We both know Sean. And he says,
okay.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, you've frozen on the screen, which is...
Okay, is it back now? Okay, let's just keep going.
I'm going to move closer to the router here and see if that makes a difference.
Technology, eh? Okay. So Sean's question, the crux, what do you think about why do you think that some students now are still being taught old paradigms? But well, that's just laziness in the course and the things. I mean, I know that a lot of courses are sort of at sort of quite a high level, and they haven't just blown off the dust on 40-year-old notes.
Yeah, and it just comes back to, I think that we're at a point in the evolution of MSK education that we're in an area that's the unknown territory, and you're getting various people coming forward with concepts and trying to get the evidence base to support what it is they propose, and great work by, say, the likes of Emma Cowley and what she's trying to present in terms of how do we teach podiatric biomechanics to the younger generation. What does that look like? How do you implement it into a undergraduate program? And if you had Doug on last week, that Doug really is very much still of the root weed and Orion model, and subtalar neutral, lock that lateral column, plantar flex the first ray.
Yeah, I'm ready. Book is a lot further on than that. I was quite interested. When I was quite interested, I mean, he was quite a split in the States. I don't know whether you saw it from the biomechanist and the surgery. And I mean, he was sort of saying that the podiatry seems to be a quick way for people just to get to do surgery and residents sort of do it. And the biomechanics sort of quite skipped and left behind because it's the rush to surgery. And obviously, we don't have that as much in Europe, where we don't have as much of a sort of surgical sort of bias to problems. But I mean, you must see that a difference because you spend quite a lot of time in the States and stuff.
Yeah, although I would say that the knowledge of sort of paradigms of orthotic therapy, biomechanics, MSK is probably more advanced in the UK and the likes of Australia than it is in the likes of the United States.
Yeah.
I find that really over the last decade, the United States has really lagged behind in terms of the new evidence base that's out there.
Yeah.
So I think UK, Ireland, Australia, way ahead of
because they're coming back to there. Because again, it's more sort of a health and insurance business and symptom treatment and
yes,
units of production out the other end for the insurance companies.
Yeah, it's a whole different market. But I think maybe there's been an increase in their desire to do surgery as well. That's maybe part of it.
Yeah, and it's yeah, no, definitely. There's certainly there's some good podiatry schools and some not so. Just the biomechanics is not so advanced. But again, as you said, it just depends on the level of the lecturers and stuff as well, and also the students' interest as well. And of course, you and I will probably go all the things about that. Everything's biomechanical related.
Well, maybe not quite, but yeah, if you think of the psychosocial model, what else is going on for people? I think it's much more complex. I think as I get older, the more I realize that it's never as simple. It's never just one thing, and it doesn't matter what aspect of your life you're talking about. It's always like, well, what else is going on? The same applies to the patients coming in with their lower limb injuries. What's going on for these people? Is it something simple or is there something much more complex?
Yes.
So it's an iterative process. It keeps evolving, and I think as a profession we keep attempting to do the best we can with what we have, but what we have keeps changing too. So it's that, I think, openness to just keep doing the best you can with what you have. There's a vulnerability in that you have to sometimes put your hand up and say, look, I got it wrong. I really, I thought this was going to work, and if you did this and that should have got it better. And sometimes you have to put your hands up and say, I don't know why you didn't get better. Yeah. Can you hear me, Justin? You've frozen on the screen again.
I can hear you. Yeah. I think the video's a little bit clicky.
Okay, you're back.
Just a couple of things that sort of popped into mind, because you have done you've looked after a couple of Premiership teams before. There's just a story, but I know we can't tell it. But you did look after some of the I think it was Chelsea football team you looked after at one stage.
Yeah, that was kind of a role that I would have played in visiting Chelsea and working there, on a regular basis. And the lab continues to supply products into the club via other podiatrists. And the other podiatrists, there's quite a few podiatrists in the UK are linked to professional soccer teams. Like we would supply, Liverpool as well. There's other clubs, Tottenham, Norwich. There's different ones, Yeah. So.
And then the development, can you see that there will be more integration of orthotics into sort of sports shoes? And we need to get Simon Bartold on, but I think even a couple of years ago he was talking about it will be turn up into the shop. And I know you have the sort of amalgamation of the shop there in Sligo, so everything's done under one roof. Can you see the day where somebody will turn up and everything will be scanned and you go for your coffee and you'll come back and you'll have your shoe will be made for you while you wait?
You know what? Potentially, yes. I could see that happening, yeah. And I mentioned earlier to you that our little shoe business called RunPod, the partner in that is a podiatrist, a young guy called John Delaney. And John, as he trained in NUIG in Galway, all the holidays that he had from his university education, he worked in various shoe outlets. And he learned a huge amount about footwear. And he uses that skill combined with his podiatric knowledge to present different types of running shoes to people as if they are the offloaders. It's like he's using the shoe as an orthotic. And he listens to the patient or the client, the person, the customer. And, okay, so you're overloading your peroneals. You keep getting this problem out here. Well, I know the shoe for you because this shoe tends to promote a different type of movement pattern. And it's incredible to listen to him. And I did suggest getting him on sometime.
I think there is a lot more because there's certainly the way the last of the shoe is and different things. And I know for patients, we could have a couple of tennis players recently with lateral ankle sprains they had quite a 4-foot flare, which gave them a lot more lateral stability. And so the footwear is a huge component that I think that gets left out, doesn't it?
It does. The way I would tend to look at it is both of us are sitting wearing glasses right now. Okay, so consider the lenses to be the orthotic therapy, and the frame is your footwear. Both go together. You can't give somebody, well, I suppose you can give them a magnifying glass, but you still have a little frame to hold it in. The frame is the shoe. So unless somebody is literally barefoot running, and I mean barefoot without any even minimalistic shoe on, they've got some type of interface between the foot and the ground on their foot, and that alters the ground reaction forces. So yeah, I think they go together. I think long term, Justin, where I would see our role being the most beneficial is with the more complex pathologies.
Yeah.
I think there's lots of people can go into the chemist and buy an over-the-counter product, or they can go to some profession that gives them an over-the-counter product and it can help. But when you start dealing with adult-acquired flat foot, or you start dealing with persistent Achilles tendinopathy, or some of the more complex pathologies, that's where we really shine. And then that's the secret, I think.
Yeah, I mean, no, there should be those sort of like different, different levels right the way through. I mean, patients have quite a choice when they're sitting there and they'll come back in after their another lockdown sort of run or sort of walk, or this afternoon, and they've got a bit of foot pain. I wore a crap pair of shoes the other day and felt a little things under my plantar fascia. But it's a great time to be in health business because everybody is exercising and using outdoors an awful lot more. But there's so much choice that people have. Somebody comes in with a painful foot this afternoon, they're straight on to Dr. Google, and there's the Amazon says this and the chemist says that, and there's so much different advice in different sort of groups. So that can be sort of quite. There's a lot of advice out there, but if you say once you get into the more complicated problems, then you need to actually see the sort of expert. Do you think podiatrists are quite good at promoting themselves as a foot expert?
I think it's like any other profession. Some are very good at it, and some are very poor. Just right across the board.
Yeah.
But again, I suppose we are trained. We all entered podiatry more than likely to help people. We weren't really thinking we're going to be entrepreneurs. There was something that made us think, well, I want to do this because I want to contribute or care for someone. The educational system was, we're going to train you to be in the NHS, or we're going to train you to be in the HSE.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, some of us have found ourselves in private practice and starting to think, well, what's a business plan? What's cash flow? What's profit and loss? And, how do you develop all of that? That's been my gig over the last year or more now. And that's it again. Different people are at different levels. Some people are sort of very, some people are, just think you just need to open up. It must be easy. Everybody's doing it. And then all of a sudden there's a huge amount of headaches, and, they don't really have a sort of plan to how they're going to develop the business and how that's going to, what they want from it. And I find that if people have come away from working for other people, or working for health service jobs, they've ended up they're being busier and working harder for earning less than they were working for somebody else. So it's not all it's cracked up to be. But certainly, people need to have a plan and sort of structure it, and not to have a business should be working for you, as you probably know, rather than you working for the business. And it's what otherwise. There's a lot of people who would be better off working for somebody else. It sounds like a great idea, though, but it's always the case.
Pardon me? Sorry, missed that. Pardon me. Okay, we'll skip over that bit. You hear me? Okay, we're back on.
Move closer to the router again. I'm just moving closer to this router. The Wi-Fi seems to drop off a little bit there.
So Neil wants to know.
I'm just moving to the router because the Wi-Fi dropped off a little bit.
Neil,
Can you hear me now?
Candide. So Neil wants to know, I have a keen interest in how foot devices stimulates the foot rather than purely thinking of the device as a physically influencing function. I'm talking extra.
Stimulates the foot. The first thing that jumps to mind there is the concept of how it affects proprioception. And I know that Doug Ritchie has done some work on this, where you examine the postural sway of someone when they're barefoot, and then compare that to when they're standing in a shoe, and then when they're standing in a shoe with an orthotic in, and then looking at the different materials. And interestingly, the harder the shell material, the better the balance. I suppose that's a bit similar to imagine standing on a hard floor on one foot compared to standing on a yoga mat. The balance changes, you know, so you get a different postural.
Yeah, well, I heard a story years ago, and it's just we had a couple of emails with Ben O'Nig, who were aware of his research, and it was all about neuroproprioceptive feedback and things. And that was it. I mean, I heard a story years ago, whether it's true or not, that they tried to make a Nike Air ice hockey boot, and they gave it to one of the professional teams, and the guys went out and didn't skate it because they couldn't feel the ice. Hence why there's not a Nike. There was no feedback. So these guys knew what they were doing, but they just didn't have the feedback from the ice, and they couldn't feel it. I mean, that's always the sort of thing. How much cushioning and how much shock absorption do you need, or do you really need? Because the foot hits the ground, and Neil, I'm sure, has found this with patients, and it gets feedback, and then all of a sudden, well, you said the yoga mat's collapsing down underneath you. The stands are shifting, like walking on the soft side of the beach and walking on the hard side, and how that has a whole sort of knock-on effect. So it's I mean, that foot-shoe interface. And I mean, I remember years ago you talking about putting, or labs would get, or people requesting to have a 1 mil carbon fiber liner. So the orthotic sat on the shoe, and it didn't sort of compress down into the shoe over time. I mean, there's so much. I mean, it's like us wearing glasses, and then the glasses actually sort of ended up sort of like, you know, completely sort of skew with, and the prescription not. You know, there's so many different factors, but there is definitely a lot of proprioceptive stuff. So, Neil wants to find out more that there is so much proprioceptive, but how much? So the Ben O'Nig stuff, and then the research by Heidi Havoc. We're trying to track down Heidi as well, and it's again a lot more sort of neurological based changes affected by the orthotic, because that's how old orthotics were manufactured. I mean, talk about proprioceptive. Basically, they had a large metal pin on the medial side of the heel, so you didn't walk on it. That was one way of making you load on the other side of your foot.
Yeah, well, so imagine the foot starts to load there. How does it respond? You know, it's like putting the rolled up handkerchief in underneath your arch. It automatically makes you supinate it, you know.
Yeah. And of course, different people's bodies are reacting differently as well. We get the day, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what always kept us, or still keeps us then continuing to learn, because we don't. The more we know, the less we realize we know all the time.
Yeah.
But the future's definitely bright, and as well as the manufacturing processes, are there any new sort of modifications or combinations or anything sort of, you know, obviously new in the world?
Well, I suppose the big thing is with our system now, it is the digital end-to-end solution. Yeah. And the use of the structure sensor with the iPad, scan the foot, you know, and there are many different types of scanners out there.
3D, even the 3D scanners on phone now
I think that will replace all the sort of physical scanners that are out there. And the big thing is, well, what do you do with that data? So it's kind of, and that varies from lab to lab, even if they have the same software. The thing is, you've got this scan data. It's a 3-dimensional representation of the foot. Now, what are you going to do? And I am excited about the potential of what you can design with 3D printing, because it's going to move away from what we consider to be the traditional orthotic shape and look and feel. But that's going to take software. So I see the software being the key to that. And then as the technology advances, you'll be able to do things with 3D printing whereby it's all one component, but the top surface feels softer than the bottom surface. Now, it's not quite there yet, but that's what's coming. And therefore you're going to get more durability within the products, I hope, as well. So yeah, I think the exciting thing is the software. Now, a couple of things we've done is we've built in simple things like metatarsal pads, second met head offloaders. Now that needs to be evolved to different pathologies. So pathology precise orthoses, that's where I see it going.
Okay. And what's that going to do then to sort of pricing and things for?
Well, I think the good news is that the design and the sustainable plant-based materials are the same as polypropylene, so it's not going to be more expensive. It's going to all be built in. And if anything, going forward with economies of scale, the prices should stay the same or even drop a little bit, because at the minute, if you needed to add a lesion accommodation, we would call it, to offload the second met head, you have a technician who is now customizing individual components to each foot. So let's say you're putting on a cork extension that has to be cut, it has to be ground. If that's all done by the software and built into the product, then you don't need the hands-on person doing that, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So, and that's where the expense in the custom-made devices are. You have all these technicians who are not only making a custom-made shell, they're making customized additions and extensions for each foot.
And do you think then it's going to, technology will progress on, as with the CAD CAM got to the stage where you would just have a small unit in your clinic and it would get rid of, the lab would have the proprietary software.
I think that's possible. There behind me is there's a little 3D tiny printer here. Yeah. You could technically print your own orthotic in your clinic. The challenge is the speed at which they print it. It takes 12 hours to print one on that. Okay. And what I'm seeing you'll get some early adopters. We've got some podiatrists who say, oh yes, that's the way I'm going to do it in my own clinic. And actually that's a model that exists in mainland Europe. So if you go to France, Belgium, Germany, a lot of them will have EVA mills in their clinic. Whereas in the UK, Australia, America, people still want to use professional labs. It's a bit like dental labs. They want to send that work out.
Yeah, it was more, there's that whole sort of like CDAS system of
yes.
and stuff, and made while you wait. And I think that was more because that developed more out of the commercial retail sector as well, sort of ski boot fitting and footbeds for sort of walking boots, and that's how that sort of developed there. And so they tend to be a lot more sort of first to, you're aware of the sort of different sports shops who have the stand down on this and get a foot insole molded to you. Yes. Actually, those are always great for business. I think a lot of people worry about, as you said, alluded to before, the chemist shop selling insoles or the local sort of sports shop. But again, I think it raises the awareness of that maybe you may have a mechanical foot-leg problem that's causing the problem. And then, as you say, seeking sort of more professional advice later on.
Yeah, and this is a nice little comment to bring up there because, here in Sligo, there was a retail outlet called Elvery's. It's a sports shop that sells all sorts of sports gear. And they decided to bring in a system where they would literally vacuum mold a little insole to your foot. And the model was, as you sell the running shoe, sell one of these insoles too. And the technology looked quite good, a little pressure plate analysis of your foot, and people liked it. And everybody panicked thinking, they're selling these insoles, these orthotic devices. And I was saying, just relax, because we're dealing with the pathologies. And that it actually was probably good for our business. And I've heard the same in the UK. There's a couple of colleagues that would practice near CDAS outlets. And I said, don't worry about that. You keep writing to the GP. You connect with the orthopedic surgeons. You're going to get the quality referrals with the significant pathologies that aren't going to be solved by some of these other simple products. Yeah. And that's your differentiating factor. That's what we do. And that's why you hear me keeping using the term podiatric medicine. I'm not saying podiatry. I'm not saying chiropody. I'm saying podiatric medicine. And I'm trying to get people to really think, right, we're at a slightly different level here, and that what we're doing is seeking to treat you in a medical way, so.
Yeah, no, I know that from before. It has raised profile. Again, a colleague down in the country, somebody had a foot pressure push the button and get orthotics. This is 10 or 15 years ago, and then they were very concerned about their practice, and then they ended up never busier from issues that were happening from the other clinics. I mean, so it can be.
Yeah, in actual fact, it helps with the marketing of the whole concept. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
My foot, my hip, or my back problem might be related to my foot.
Yes.
I think we need to be more. Definitely need to shout that from the rooftops more, that podiatric medicine can make a huge difference. Right across, as you alluded to, through the diabetic, through musculoskeletal.
That's why I talk a lot about the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons in Glasgow, and I would counsel everybody to seek to be a member of that. And actually, through our office here, we do assist people in applying to get memberships or fellowship positions, which we've helped a lot of people get. And I know I've a lot of friends in medicine, and suddenly I had a fellowship from the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons, and they were like, "How did you get that?" And I was going, "Well, I was invited to have it." And think again, in Scotland, in that Royal College, they have not invited occupational therapy, they have not invited physiotherapy, they have not invited dietetics, they have invited podiatric medicine. Why? Because they see the benefit of podiatric medicine worldwide on a global scale as being really essential, really important, and one of the most expanding professions there is. That's why. So we're in that organisation right alongside the dentists, right alongside the medics, right alongside the physicians, the surgeons, travel medicine, all there. So I think it's important that we step up, take the baton and say, yes, we're happy to be here and we've a lot to contribute.
And just an Ireland-centric thing again, do you think that the advent of the thru will make a huge difference then in podiatry services here? Or like in the UK, it won't make any difference to protection of title and public awareness?
Good question. I don't know the answer to that. You mean you hope that it makes a big difference, but it's one of those ones time will tell,
Yeah. Again, I think it's, yeah. Well, I know in the UK, I mean, there's quite a lot of, it's different. It's challenging. It's challenging. I think, again, we shouldn't be hiding a light under a bushel, and we shouldn't be worrying about what other people are thinking or saying about us as a profession. As you know, unless you do actually take something and run with it, nothing ever changes or gets done, does it?
Yeah, but again, sometimes people can be limited by, like, let's say you're a really good podiatrist, but you happen to be in, whether it's an NHS trust or a HSE trust, and you're just snowballed by diabetic patients and you don't have resources. And, it's different when you're out in the private world and you can maybe push things on and press on and grab things. Not to say you can't do it within those scenarios, but sometimes you could be limited by circumstances. Possibly. Yeah,
again, a lot of forms, PASCOM and stats to fill in for.
Yeah, the bureaucracy.
For God knows what reason. But, so.
Okay.
Would you say, we should probably have a chat about the other sort of side of things, maybe at a later stage. So tell people, Martin, how can people get in touch with you if they want to find out about more?
Well, email is probably the best, martin@firefly.ie, or you can look up Firefly orthoses.ie. Firefly Orthoses will find me, or just that personal email, martin@firefly.ie. Don't hesitate to ask, because I do genuinely love helping people if I can. That's part of, I suppose, my nature. I'll do the best I can.
And the office seems pretty busy there. I mean, you guys haven't sort of scaled, as you said, things are busy.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say within the lab side of the business, we were back up to about 70% of what we were doing prior to COVID, but we've dropped now because, again, the military pods have been seconded into the given vaccinations. We're probably at about 50% now, but our clinics really expanded, which is interesting to see, and there just seems to be a huge demand, particularly within the Republic of Ireland. Maybe if you looked at Northern Ireland, there's a greater number of private practices. there's a greater NHS service within podiatric medicine. And then when you come into the Republic of Ireland, the service within the HSE is more diabetic led. And what you find then is patients here are now having to go privately, but that's going to happen in the UK too.
Yeah, I would say that the clinics that we're working with, they're absolutely killing it at the moment, offering the services to people who've been waiting on health service appointments through no fault of their own, especially musculoskeletal side of things for 6 months, a year, even up to a couple of years.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting times.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Recently I've had 2 phone calls to my personal mobile, one a neighbour and one a cousin, and they both came in with the classic plantar heel pain, that's been developing really for years, but it's only now that it's really troubling them, sort of men in their 60s, and it's all out there. They're constantly coming, aren't they? I mean, just we're always going to be of service to people like that and so on. So that's the
foot problems. I mean, I think nothing to admit Tony and Navin, but I mean, I couldn't sit and look at somebody's mouth all day. It'd be quite dull and boring. Full biomechanics is a lot more interesting.
Yes, absolutely. And I think one of the things, what we should all think of podiatrists is that what's gravity doing to everybody, putting us into the ground, Justin. And so how do you resist gravity? Well, you got to get strong, so you got to do some sort of strength work. But after that, it's back to the footwear. It's back to whatever. But I find that fascinating. Gravity.
Yeah, working again.
Don't start me.
That's great, Martin. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Justin, and bye, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Okay, we'll do. So thank you very much, everybody. We'll get rid of this.
Okay.
And we'll finish this. Cheerio now, everybody, and see you soon.